Hi, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Campaign Considerations, and we're really delighted to welcome the Reverend Douglas Schonberg, who is a PCC minister and right now functioning as a consultant as he continues some of his studies. So I'll go to the next slide. Just a few protocols for our webinar today. We have everyone muted, and so we ask that you stay muted and use the chat if you have any questions that you want to say during the presentation. At the end, we will unmute everyone and we'll be able to have a more verbal conversation because it's such a small group. If you're asking a question or making a comment, be sure to give a clue or reference to what your question is referring to, because sometimes we don't see the comments until after, a few minutes later. And yeah, so that's basically just to let you know. The next slide. Brief introduction. I'm Karen Plater, and I'm the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving at the Presbyterian Church in Canada. And I was joined by my colleagues in the Stewardship and Planned Giving Department. We have Maggie Lewing, who's the Gifts and Database Administrator. Anyone who has tried to make a gift of stock or securities for their congregation or national ministry has probably met Maggie. Jim McDonald is the Development Manager, and he's been busy helping congregations set up digital giving and donation buttons on their websites, and he will help you if you're looking to do any type of capital or annual campaign and work through what you might need to support you in that. And then Heather Chappell is our Education Program Coordinator, and anyone who has seen any of the resources for Presbyterian sharing or brochures or pamphlets about planned giving or stewardship, it has come through Heather Chappell's fingers. So we're happy to join with you. We're interested in what Doug is presenting as well for our own knowledge, and so that we can support you after the webinar. Feel free to contact us at any time. And the next slide. Okay, and just to let you know that the recording, the slides and notes will be available at presbyterian.ca/leadership webinars. I'll be emailing all congregations and ministers to let them know once it's posted. Feel free to share it around. We want this resource to be as helpful to as many people. And there's many who aren't able to attend live with us, but we'll be watching the recording later. And then I think the next slide is going to take me, and I'm going to be able to hand this over. Yay. I've worked with Doug for many years. When I started 15 years ago as the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving, Doug was on my advisory committee that was supporting the church in running the Stewards by Design conference, and he was very instrumental in having ideas that could help congregations in stewardship. And when we did some case studies for Stewards by Design, he would share about the capital projects that had been done at Chippewa Presbyterian Church, where he was minister. And so when I was wanting to have a few webinars on capital campaigns, I immediately thought of Doug, and I'm sure that you'll find him a wonderful presenter and full of a lot of information. So if he doesn't cover something, feel free to ask him anything. There are no stupid questions. Just, don't remain quiet. Find out, answer those questions. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Doug.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for doing me the honor of coming to listen to some of the things that I'm hoping to share with you today. I want to give you a little bit of context and point of view of who it is that you're listening to, just to give you a sense of orientation to where I'm coming from as I speak to you today, and what I have to offer for this webinar and for next week as well. As Karen said, I was the minister at Chippewa Presbyterian Church in Niagara Falls. I served with this congregation from 1998 to 2020. And in early 2020, I took early retirement. I'm currently back at school working on a doctorate of practical theology. And my focus there is on leadership development and leadership health. I've started a small business called Relational Systems Consulting, and that consulting business is focused upon Again, leadership health, leadership development, good leadership, both in a corporate sense of perhaps session, board, larger organizations as a whole, but also individual leadership. Today, I'll be sharing from my personal learned experience. I am not a capital campaign consultant. I have been through 3 capital campaigns, but I would never presume to call myself a capital campaign consultant. But I learned some things along the way. And so I'm happy to share a bit of our story, some of the sort of key things that have been significant in my learning in that time. By way of further context, Chippewa Presbyterian Church, the attendance range when I was serving there was about 110 to 170. 170 would be our good strong Sundays, 110 sort of a summer Sunday. And we were working from an annual budget that was approximately $200,000 a year. So again, I just share that with you to give you a sense of where we were coming from. We completed a renovation project that was 8 times the size of our annual budget. So it was a $1.6 million renovation with additions. And that mortgage and all that work is now completely paid. They had a mortgage. You don't burn things in church anymore, so they had a mortgage shredding event just this past summer. So all of that has been completely looked after. And
when did you start that program? When did you start? Like, how long did it take to get it paid off?
Yeah, so payment incomplete, from the start of the campaign till the shredding was 14 years. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through. So it's not a short-term thing for sure. I've been invited to do 2 webinars with you. This week, we're going to look at reasons for a capital campaign and also research that should be sort of examined and explored prior to having a campaign. Next week, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the particulars to pay attention to when actually running a campaign. Things like, should we hire a fundraiser, a professional fundraiser to help us with this? If we do, what are we looking for? If we don't, what responsibilities are we going to carry? That kind of thing. So this week is sort of preparing. Next week will be the running of. I want to get you thinking today about the why, the reasoning behind your capital campaign. I want to get you thinking about the research and the homework that you should have on your radar before you even try and raise a single dollar. A strong capital campaign is one that has a clear, compelling reason and purpose to it. A strong capital campaign is one that addresses the questions that may be on donors' minds. And if you can address those questions ahead of time, you're going to engender a spirit of confidence and competence before you even begin to ask for significant donations. So having these things in play, having your reasons, having your research done will set a foundation that gives you a positive and successful campaign. Here are some potential reasons you may have for a capital campaign. Some of these might be what brought you here today. The most obvious one and the most common one is the facility. You may want an addition. There's a space need that you're discussing continually and wish you had. It could be accessibility issues. In the Presbyterian Church in Canada, many of our facilities were built literally in the previous century, sometimes 2 centuries ago. And so issues of accessibility weren't in people's minds sort of in 1890. So you may have some washroom ramp accessibility issues. Because our buildings are older, repairs come to mind. New roof, mortar work, foundations, these kinds of things that can be prohibitively expensive. Or, the way your space was set up no longer suits the ministry needs and intentions that you have. So you might need to do a larger renovation. So that is a sort of the primary reasons that you see capital campaigns being undertaken. I would say the second largest reason, or the second most prominent reason, is the establishment of an endowment. Endowments can be just beautiful tools for strengthening and enhancing ongoing ministry in a congregation. So there might be a mission that your church context absolutely adores, something in the community, something in sort of world evangelism or other countries that you're supporting. And, you would love to just set up a big fund to make sure that that ministry has ongoing support. Some congregations look at creating an endowment that will address the annual capital repairs that seem to come along. Wouldn't it be nice to have an endowment in place so that when the boiler goes, we have funding that has been set aside ahead of time to help with those issues, or needing new windows or the parking lot repaving, that kind of thing. So endowments can be set up to handle sort of the out of a normal line item capital repairs that come along. Some congregations set up endowments for ministry funding. Having an annual line for a youth worker in the budget just might be beyond a capacity, but a capital campaign that creates an endowment that can ensure that that staffing position continues might be something that a church has in mind. Sometimes there are ministry needs. I think in 2020, every church went shopping for cameras and soundboards and ways that would help them broadcast online. I bet there's probably a webinar on the website on where to find all this stuff. So furniture, equipment, ministry tools that might be needed. Ministry opportunities come along. Is there something going on at the local school? Is there a food bank that could use support? Homelessness programs, these kinds of things. And then I have a catch-all category of just simply other. Is there a need that the congregation has that just can't be met with the regular budget? So those are some of the reasons that congregations find themselves in conversation about when it comes to raising additional money. So I would ask some questions at the beginning of a project. Often capital campaigns arise out of the need to fix a problem. Something's broken, we need it to be repaired. And internally oriented problem-solving capital campaigns are hard. They don't necessarily inspire generous giving. Everyone knows the roof needs to be fixed, but it is, I don't want to say boring, but it's not fun, right? Fixing the roof is not fun. And if you're focused on fixing the roof, generally you're just reminding everybody in the congregation how old their own shingles are on their own house. So yes, those things can prompt a conversation, but it's important to build out from a perceived need to a ministry purpose. Telling sort of a hardcore committed person about fixing the roof is easy. Talking to somebody who may be on an outer circle of your congregation about why they should help pay you to fix your roof is a very, very different kind of conversation. And often Presbyterians tend to be hardcore inner circle types and, think that the roof should be reason enough. But it makes for a difficult campaign. So I encourage churches to ask a question like, who is this for? What is the perceived need? A roof isn't just a roof. A roof is also a worship space. A roof represents gathering together. A roof is up over the table where we sit around. These kinds of things. It's describing more fulsomely what the ministry is. Before a capital campaign begins, have we explored other means to resolve or meet this need? Is there another way to solve an accessibility issue? Does it need a capital campaign? Maybe we have 4 or 5 donors who are willing to step in and take care of it, in which case you don't need to go full capital campaign with it. I think you need to be able to articulate what will be different, better when this is all done. You have a clear sense of when this is finished, this is going to be why it's amazing. And then the values and principles that are driving the conversation. Everyone knows a leaky roof is a leaky roof, but are there values and principles under there, apart from the roof, that would motivate somebody to give generously? So as I was saying earlier, it's not just a roof, it's a warm, dry space where we gather to praise God together, hear the word together. So the roof represents much more than just a leak. And then finally, is this indeed a capital campaign, or is it perhaps another type of giving? So these, again, some underlying questions to hold for those of you that are talking about it in your congregation. Is the capital campaign for people, not peace of mind? Often churches sort of have this secret wish for a pot of money so that they don't have to worry about money. But that's not people, that's peace of mind. That's a resolution to anxiety as opposed to a ministry purpose. One of the things, a consultant that's had a huge influence on me, Ken Callahan, he often said and always said, money follows mission. So if your purpose for raising funds is for mission and ministry rather than budget relief, you're going to have an easier time raising money. Is this something special and other, as opposed to, oh, we really need to boost the annual budget or budget relief, or our budget's been too big for too long and now we're in a deficit? And, that is, again, difficult to raise money in a capital campaign for those things. And is it beyond what can be done with a short-term special appeal? If you needed AVL equipment in 2020, you could probably have accomplished that with a special appeal. It's not too difficult when people see an obvious need to raise money quickly for something like that, in which case you don't need a full capital campaign. So here's another way of thinking about what kind of fundraising are we looking to be doing, and just a way to clarify and articulate what the purpose behind your consideration of a capital campaign is. Again, Ken Callahan speaks about how people give in multiple ways to the ministry of the church. So you can have spontaneous giving. So those are like, I think of the PWS&D Appeal Sundays. We're going to raise money for Ukraine. People pull out their wallets, their checkbooks, their e-transfer. They raise money and, boom, there's a few thousand for Ukraine, just like that. Major community worship giving, those are those great Sundays, Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, Mother's Day, and perhaps some others that you've created where giving is stronger than usual because there's more people present, and the people that are only at church once or twice a year remember, it's like, oh, I like this place, and they give a good gift. So that's a way people give. Special planned giving, this kind of refers back to those perhaps short-term projects that could be done and completed without a major capital campaign. AVL equipment, new furniture for the Sunday school, whatever it is that is below your annual budget. But you could do a short drive, raise $15,000 to build a school somewhere, these kinds of things, special planned giving. Major project giving is sort of your capital campaign. Here is a big project well beyond our annual budget. We're going to have to work a little longer, a little harder, a little more intentionally to make this one happen. Congregations have their annual budget giving, envelopes, e-transfers, PAR. And then enduring giving is wills, bequests, gifts that are given with the intent of outliving the person who has given them. And sometimes those can be incorporated into a capital campaign as well, where people might not have access to funds immediately, but do have assets or life insurance or annuities that they would like to contribute upon their passing, upon their death. That can be part of a major giving project. So those are ways to be thinking. It's like, what kind of giving do we need in this instance? And is it actually a capital campaign that's needed? So you're looking at a project. Should this be a capital campaign project? I measure things against the capacity of your annual budget. So sometimes little churches say we're a little church, big churches are, we're a big church. Big churches, big problems, little churches, little problems. Everybody feels behind the eight ball when it comes to raising money. It doesn't matter the size of the church. So don't let yourself off the hook because you're larger, but neither think that you can't do something because you're smaller. So think in proportion or in relation to your annual budget. You might consider a capital campaign if it is more than 25% of your annual budget. Why do I say 25%? It's a gut check. It feels right. So in our $200,000 a year budget at Chippawa, 25%, $50,000. It's like, that feels like a pretty good chunk. Can we do it in a short-term project? We had before, but it still felt big. So that one for me was sort of the where the scale starts to tip a little bit. So it's a random number. It's a number I've sort of picked out of the air, but has my experiential gut check with it. Once you start getting more than 25%, people start to realize that this is pretty big. This isn't, 10 people writing checks. This is some time and some effort and some intentionality. 25 to 50% of an annual budget could possibly be completed as a shorter term campaign. I believe you could probably do that in a year. But at more than half to full size of your annual budget, I would start considering a capital campaign at that point. So again, in Chippewa's context, if we're looking to raise $100,000 to $200,000 in addition to the annual budget, then yeah, a capital campaign might be in order. When you get into 3 times your annual budget, you're now looking at a multi-year capital campaign. Those are kinds of the questions. Are we in capital campaign territory? I would use these just as guidelines, but I believe any congregation in proportion to their budget can be successful in these ratios and in that thinking. So that is a way to think about it. So I'm going to give you sort of our story at Chippewa in terms of reasons and research and how that progressed. And I'll give you a little bit of a timeline later in the presentation, but here are the things that we talked about. Our problems and wish list came out of a facility that dated back to 1831, had a fire, was rebuilt in the 1890s, another fire, and we had a 1960s A-frame, a 1973 Christian education wing that was built, all before handicapped accessibility was on the radar as part of the conversation. And it created a layout to the facility. Have you ever been in those homes or sort of old farmhouses where each successive family did its own addition and you end up with a rabbit warren of additions and things? That was kind of what our facility was like. So inevitably at a board meeting or a session meeting or a congregational meeting, somebody would say, we need a handicapped accessible washroom on our lower level in our lower hall, because we didn't have one. We had like 3 steps up to get to those washrooms. We did not have an elevator. We had a chairlift down a back staircase. You see them on the television commercials, those people on their stairways and they're sitting on a chair and they get slid up and slid down. And anybody that said it was adequate, I made them go ride it. And it was terrifying. So you can go to Wonderland or you can do the chairlift at the back of Chippewa Presbyterian Church. Our nursery was on the other side of the facility in the basement. If you were a parent with young children, there's no way you were going to find that, and there was no way you're going to leave your child behind in a back corner basement. Our office layout, the office was at the furthest point from the entrance to the building. Our foyer was too small. We were doing a rotation model for Sunday school, and our children ended up in every corner of the building. And after church was done, no parent could find their child because it is a 20,000 square foot facility. And so people were all over the building. So the Sunday school layout wasn't working for us. Our worship space was designed in 1960. So we had a fixed choir loft, organ console. It made it very difficult to do anything from a Christmas pageant to having a contemporary worship expression happen at the front. And then just the energy efficiency of the space, a lot of single pane glass windows. It was drafty as all get out, but it was a sauna in the summer. So, as clergy, as board members, as session members, not much of a month went by that we heard about these issues. And so we started gathering up the list of, if we could have the perfect ideal situation, what would we do? There were values that were driving these conversations. Accessibility was a value. We wanted people to actually be able to get into the building. And if they're in the building, to be able to use the washroom, to be able to join in whatever ministry was happening in whatever corner of the space where it was happening. Hospitality was a core value. We wanted to be welcoming. We wanted the warmth and friendliness of our people to be represented in the facility itself. We were intentionally trying to be invitational. If we invite somebody to this space, if we invite our friend who also has a young child and we bring them to this space, is it an invitational space? Is it, hey, this is warm and friendly and bright and welcoming? Or is it, I'll take your word for it that my kid will be okay here, right? I'll lean into the trust of our friendship as opposed to trust in this environment that I'm in. A key one for me, which I sort of introduced to the church, was flexibility with the space. Can this space be 7 different things? Or is it just going to be one thing? So if something's bolted to the floor, if something's immovable, if something is so clearly designated as being one thing, are we losing opportunities to use the space in other ways? The most tangible example of what came of it, our sanctuary space is the best space in the church. It's the biggest, it's the brightest, it had the most opportunity, and yet we bolted benches to the floor. We created it to be one thing. When the renovation was completed, we had chairs, everything was movable. We could change our worship space. We ran Vacation Bible School in there. We could use the stage for skits and fun things. So it became a multiple space. We had banquets in there. We could set up tables, like it became multi-purpose. So that flexible and adaptable kind of go together. So those values were driving our conversations. It's like, this space can only do this, and it was frustrating us. And this space, it's not hospitable, it's not warm and accessible. So these things drove it. And it led us to the conversations. Who does it serve? We wanted to serve seniors. If you show up with a walker, we want you to be able to get into the building. If you show up with an infant, we want you to be confident that this is every bit as clean and bright and well cared for as any space in any childcare facility. We wanted our staff to be able to work collegially together rather than being in separate corners of the building. And we wanted new worshipers to feel that they knew what the space was doing and what it was like. So we explored solutions for each of these individually. We, as an example, we looked into putting in an elevator that would get us to the lower hall. But if you put in the elevator, then you're going to want the handicapped accessible washroom. If you put in the handicapped accessible washroom and the elevator, then you need permits. If you put in permits and go to the city for the permits, now you have to bring everything else in the building up to code as well, because now the city's in your building saying, well, now that you're doing this, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, and you need to fix this. At which point the board of managers would be like, oh boy, that just got really big, really fast. And so a lot of our projects were left incomplete. So we knew we had a huge list of things to address. And so we tried to make sure we were still thinking outside the box. And so this last one on the screen, The decision to explore a complete update of the facility included, should we sell the facility and build new? Should we renovate an alternate property? A lot of churches in our area had bought decommissioned elementary schools. It's like, would it make sense for us to go into an elementary school, renovate it to our purposes? Would that be better? So we looked at all of these things so that, when you went to the congregational meeting and somebody who had a brother that went to one of these churches that bought the elementary school, it's like, why aren't we buying a school? And you had the answer. You had done some of the homework of, these are the things they are dealing with and confronted with. So it's important when you're building confidence in donors to know answers to the questions that are going to arise. So that's my if you don't come away with anything else today, come away with the do the homework message. Do as much research as possible prior to beginning any capital campaign. Be able to easily and quickly articulate the vision and also the ministry purpose. Be able to flesh out the story, not just that it's a leaky roof, but what that roof means, the significance of gathering together. Anticipate and be able to answer questions and concerns. This has guided me in my ministry all the way through. You can almost anticipate what people are going to ask. You just sort of put those voices into your head, into the meeting, bring them along. Somebody's going to ask this, they are. So be ready. Invest resources into information. So spend money if you need to find out answers, whether it's going to the city, applying for permits, whether it is paying an architect to do a preliminary study, even if they don't do full drawings. Be ready for many surprises and, keep calm when they come. Well, one of my favorite surprises for Chippewa Presbyterian Church, when we started working with the city, we had about 6 different names from the first property, the second property, the third property. We weren't incorporated in a single thing. So we had to get all that paperwork done. So it was off to the lawyer to get that looked at. It's like, we're Chippewa Press, so that was an education. And then as you're doing your homework, just be mindful that you are building the case that you are making before going to people to ask them for significant donations. You're building a case of compassion, competence, and confidence to prime people's generosity. It's like, these people know what they're doing. They've done their homework. I can give with confidence and in a generous manner.
Just a question to give you a
Yes.
little bit of a pause and break. Who was the we when you were on a team? Did you have a team, like a capital campaign team or a stewardship team, or was it your session? Who sort of led and drove this when you say we?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you, Karen. So our we was a subcommittee from session and board together. The congregation had in it a person who was worked at the region, was a regional planner. We had a person in the congregation who was a property manager, put them in. We brought in some ministry-minded people who could speak to the ongoing ministry needs. And so we built a small team to do this kind of homework on behalf of session. For a congregation, build your own we. It doesn't need to be highly formalized, but sort of a fun working group that can do the homework. So thank you, Karen. That's a great question. To support you in doing your homework, there are some really, really excellent resources that the PCC has already prepared. I used them, and I encourage you to use them as well. There's a book that has been done by Ralph Kendall called When You Build, a guide for congregations of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So this is for sort of a major, a new build, a major renovation, and it is extremely helpful. It will make you mindful of questions your session, your board, your working team should ask. It does not address sort of the city region level of homework, which you may need to address as well, but it will get you thinking about the things that you need to be thinking about. Another helpful prompt is the Church Architecture Committee, which has its own page on the PCC website. They also have a PDF document, Guidelines for Successful Construction Projects. Again, this would deal with new build, major renovations, additions, that kind of thing. Again, just an excellent way to get your team, whoever the we is, or your board or your session, to be articulating the research that needs to be done, the questions that you need to be asking. If you are thinking more endowment or legacy, there's also a resource called Setting Up Legacy Funds and Endowments. Excuse me. So if you're going to do a capital campaign to build an endowment, this is an excellent resource for you. And again, gets you thinking about what are the things we need to be asking, what are the things we need to do. So I'd encourage you to just go into any of these and take a deep dive to resource yourself for the work that is ahead. So just by way of tangible example, Chippewa did extensive research from 2005 to 2007. We started doing work with architects ahead of the first capital campaign in 2008. And then our shovel went in the ground in 2010. So what you can see in that progression is we actually started raising money before the shovel went in the ground. People give more when they're excited about what's to come. Once they're already in the renovated new facility, the anticipation goes away, and then it becomes a mortgage payment, which is far less exciting than, ooh, we're going to have an elevator. So here are some of the things that happened from 2005 to 2009. We explored options other than renovating. We looked at selling. We looked at purchasing another building. We looked at design builds. We found an architect. We put out a request for proposal to have an architect come up with a vision to address that list I mentioned to you earlier, and see who could be the most creative in redesigning our space, reflecting our values, reflecting our sort of to-do list. The legal name part I told you about, we had to get that all cleaned up. We gave consideration to hiring a fundraising consultant. So we looked at some proposals from fundraising consultants and did some interviews to see if it was merited. There were denominational permissions that were needed at the presbytery level, the architectural committee at the national level. So we needed to prepare documents and have stuff ready there. And then you need to get financing in place, because a capital campaign will be successful, but you're not likely to raise all the money needed. As much as we wished for it at Chippewa, you're not going to have all the money ahead of schedule. You're going to be carrying debt for a while the capital campaigns run their course. So you are going to need some banking options in place. And you can look at foundations, denominational grants, bank loans, and the Presbyterian Church Building Corporation is super helpful here, and we'll talk about that next week. We contacted the city, talked to the planning department, found out the requirements, building codes, site planning, parking, zoning, architect. You can ask, we talked to the architect of the 1960 building. He was still alive. Could be somebody local, somebody in other churches used. There are advantages to having an architect. Provides an immediate liaison with the city. They're aware of current codes. They're the ones that talk to the general contractor. They've got experience of designing space, making aesthetic choices, rather than a committee arguing over the color of whatever this is going to be. And I said it twice, but that liaison with the general contractor was invaluable. The denomination. You've got presbytery requirements. So for Chippewa, Niagara Presbytery is our presbytery, and they had a quite substantial minute of inquiry that we needed to complete. And congregational meetings are required. Those are in the Book of Forms 151, 162, 200.8, and then again the National Architectural Committee. So in summary, I just encourage you to do the homework. Be prepared, have a foundation under you before you even begin a capital campaign. Know why you're doing it, know who it's for, know how you're going to do it, know when it's going to happen. And when you have that research complete, it becomes a foundation for building the capital campaign itself, which then invites people into being generous to accomplish these things, to fulfill these values, to get the to-do list done, to think about infants in a bright space and seniors able to come to church when they couldn't before because they didn't have access. Those conversations are empowering and fun, and they are very fulfilling and spirit inspired when they're happening, and it makes it easier then to start raising funds for capital. And then my final sort of thought for you is to not stop being the church because you're trying to raise money. Sometimes we get so fixated on the roof or the addition or the new property that we forget that we're the church. And so I love Acts 2 for this. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. The believers were together. They had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God, enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So the work we do in a capital campaign, it's never the roof. It is this Acts 2 vision of being the believers together and inviting daily people into a relationship with Christ and with God. So if you can connect to those things in your capital campaign, if you can bring that together, you're going to be carrying out the mission of the church, not just completing a successful campaign. So that is my presentation for today. Next week, I will get infinitely more specific in terms of campaigns themselves, from things to ask when considering a fundraising consultant, should you do so. But then if you don't, key principles and strategies for running a campaign. So Karen, I think you become a moderator now for Q&A, and if you want me to, I can stop sharing my screen so we can see people. Whatever you tell me what you want.
Let's do that. Let's stop sharing your screen so that we can see people. That'll be nice. All right, so we are going to open it up for Q&A. I'm going to let you, I just was looking to see if I'm allowed to, I think you can unmute yourself if you have a question you want to ask, and I'll start by asking a question. I really liked, and because I've heard you talk before about identifying the who, and I know even when you got into the capital campaign, that's what you focused on when you were raising the funds. So it wasn't about expanding the space, but it was about making it accessible for someone with a disability. And it wasn't just an abstract idea. It was like, here are some of the people who are coming to our church or would like to come to our church and are actually using it.
Right. So to quote Ken and Callahan again, he will say, people give to people. People don't give to square footage, and people don't give to mortgages. People give to people. So when we talked about the physical property issues, we always referred to it in terms of the people. So at that time, Elsa had just been born, brand new baby, and everybody was so excited, and Elsa was delightful. And so we would show a picture of our nursery. It's like, we're going to put Elsa here, and the church would be like, we don't want to put Elsa there. We love Elsa, so let's find a great spot for Elsa. And when it came to our accessibility issues, Bill, dearly loved lifetime member of the church, but struggling with cerebral palsy. And it's like, Bill, let's watch Bill try and get into this place, and let's watch Bill try and use a washroom. And everyone was horrified. It's like, we can't let Bill do that. And so the motivation of who was completely powerful. completely powerful. So it's not, oh, look, the washroom has a handle in it or a bar in it, or, you can turn a wheelchair in it. It's like, wow, Bill can come to church comfortably, knowing that he's not going to be in a panic 45 minutes into the service because he can't use the washroom.
Great. I just figured out how to. I just clicked on allow participants to unmute themselves. So now you should be able to unmute yourself if you have something that you would like to say or ask. Maybe, or even if you just want to share where you're coming from. I'd love to know who we've got and what your experience is or what you're thinking about in your area. Someone's like, oh yeah, okay, Deb. So you have to find the little unmute. There should be an unmute. I might be able to unmute you, just a sec. Ask to mute, but can I unmute you? No, you have to hit unmute. Little microphone. She's looking for it. Okay, let me go and look again.
There. Now can you hear me?
There, she
Yeah.
found it.
Yeah, you had to do it for me. I kept clicking on the unmute button and it wouldn't work. It said host has to do it. So
Okay.
anyway, my question, our church in Simcoe, Ontario, we did a big capital campaign some years ago to do an addition on our church. But we're now talking about, I don't know if we may feel where there are some rumblings anyway that we may feel that we have history that we would like to follow through in the future and build upon and get people very excited about this ministry opportunity for our neighborhood where we live. So I'm just wondering, when you talk to everyone in your congregation about this capital campaign, did you address your mission statement and your vision statement and that sort of thing as well, so that people knew that this was something that you've been maybe looking at for some time? Was that involved at all, or is that separate?
It was reflected in the values and
Right, okay.
So we didn't speak specifically to a mission statement, but when we built the campaign, we were very intentional to build a campaign that easily identified those values. So for our first campaign, we called it Opening the Doors. So it's a very, very simple 3 words, but you can hear the values in there, right? Opening the doors, it's invitational, it's hospitality, it's accessibility, it's all of these things. And so we were then able to relate our facility goals to the campaign title, to the values that we were trying to express. So it wasn't our annual report mission statement, but it did reflect the care and where the Spirit was moving us at that point. So if your congregation is having a certain conversation about a certain ministry in your community, I would look to distill the value that is driving that conversation and transform that into sort of your launch pad for a campaign.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Lynn, did you have a question? I think you should be able to unmute yourself now.
No, that's fine. It's just I tried to unmute and I got a message that said the host does not allow unmuting.
Okay.
Well,
Okay, I think it's working now. Yeah.
yeah, it is. I guess this might be a question more for next week, but I was struck by your comment that you need to start ahead of time because there's more excitement before the work is done than after it's done. And we're in the unfortunate position that the work is done, but we've still got a long way to go. Are you going to talk about that next week?
Absolutely. So 14 years was start to finish for us. And so there is the I'm looking for the great mnemonic for the difficult middle, the mortgage middle, right? So it's like you're in the new facility, isn't this great? And it's like, oh, by the way, we have 2/3 of the cost left to finish, and we're having a capital campaign for all the things that I said were unfun, which is mortgage payments, right? So now you've got to design a campaign that can inspire continued giving. So that was sort of our middle campaign. The second one, we did 3 to finish, start to finish. And so I will talk about things you can do to make that middle campaign, which is the most difficult one, have some momentum. Momentum in the middle, maybe that's what I'll call it. So
sure. Ours is actually 15. We gave ourselves 15 years and divided it into 3 5-year chunks.
Right.
Okay.
That makes sense. The middle chunk is the hardest. The end chunk, it's like they see the finish line and there's motivation there. And even at the end of Chippewa's, that last bit, a donor stepped forward because they were excited to be the one that gave the gift that finished it. And it's like, woohoo, this is great. But the meandering middle, I don't know, it's the middle is tough. And so we will talk about how you can actually tie the middle to people and to values to make it something that continues to have motivation.
The other thing that I'm hoping we'll talk about is community support. Some of our capital campaigns are beyond the capability of the congregation itself. And we actually have a conversation next week with a local large corporation, which says, we do not support churches, we do not support buildings, but give us your case. Tell us why we should support you. So it's how we frame those kinds of conversations with donors who are willing to talk to us, but they don't want to support a church and they don't want to just support bricks and mortars, but we're willing to support community. What are you doing for the community that we can support here? So very interested in that, in how do you engage the community and how do you get them to support you?
Right. So, we'll talk about that next week as well, but just to give you a quick handle that you can grab in case you meet with them and miss the webinar, keep it about the people. Yeah. So, religious ideology is not going to invite a corporation to give to you. They're going to run, as fast as they can out of the room if that's the case. But if you can identify Elsa and Bill and the people in your community that you will be serving and how they will be served and how it will be better when they've been served, you've given that corporation something to consider.
Yeah. Actually, our meeting is before the webinar next week. That's why I asked this week.
There you go. So my quick advice, make your case about the people, the help they need, the help they'll be given, and why you as a congregation are in the best place to provide that.
I see Barbara has a question. So can you see if you can unmute yourself, Barbara?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Karen. And thank you, Heather, for organizing today and everybody else who did. I'm rather new to stewardship, so I appreciate all the help I can get. And Douglas, I made a lot of notes and you're a very logical presenter, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And
I'll take that as a compliment.
Definitely, that's the way I like it. I like action events. Anyway, I'm from Grace Presbyterian Church in Calgary. It is a beautiful old sandstone church from 1905. And I'm really happy to say we already have an elevator, we already have accessible entrances, we already have washrooms, blah, blah, blah. But there's lots of things we don't have. And we have a chapel separate from the actual huge sanctuary. And there's a renovation committee, which I'm on. And what we want to do is change the pews, which are attached to the floor, of course, for chairs that you can move so it can be more multi-purpose. And the thing that I'm asking you, and I'll ask everybody here, is the resistance to that is enormous.
It is.
Yes, and I can't get over it. I tell them to go to such and such a funeral home in Calgary. They don't have pews. They have chairs that interlock and they're really comfortable, way more comfortable than pews. So it's a very hard sell in many ways, just because people were married there or something. It's not even going to change visibly except for that. And one idea you had about show them the baby in the nasty place. Our church is the second largest satellite for the food bank in Calgary.
Mm.
And they operate out of that chapel because it's accessible and close to the street, etc. It's really a good place. And they put those 8-foot plastic white folding tables on top of the pews. That's how inconvenient it is for them. And I'm thinking your idea of take a picture and show everybody that would be a really good idea. Do the rest of you encounter huge resistance to changing? Lynn?
We removed one row of back pews and to make a larger foyer for people to take their coats off. And the emails and grumbling went on for weeks. And in fact, one of them we had to put back because the lady said, my father sat here, my grandfather sat here, and I'm going to sit here till my dying day.
Well, that was really encouraging, Lynn. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Barbara, if I may, what you're describing was probably my top challenge when we were doing our renovation. It was the hill I had to die on. Change the washroom, nobody, but as soon as people found out we weren't going to be putting pews into the sanctuary, that's when, the meetings got exciting. And so part of my strategy was, as you said, the number of obus forms that came to church on Sundays was incredible to me. Like, people are bringing cushions and obus forms, and they were the ones advocating for keeping the pews. I couldn't get my head around it.
We have that too.
Yeah, one of the things that I was able to do was there's a quote out there. The definition of sacred is what we've forgotten where it came from. So a pew is a wood bench, and wood benches were brought into churches before you sat in church. There was a time in the history of the church you stood in church, and accommodation was made by putting a wood bench. And if you get into a really old church, a pioneer village type of church, you'll see benches that they look like the dugout bench at a baseball game, right? That the ball players sit on. That was the accommodation that was made. And then somebody thought, well, it would be nice to have a back on this. And I've been in churches that have had sort of a 6-inch base to sit on and a right angle back on them. And, I'm a tall guy, and so I could barely get my rear end onto those. And then somebody thought, well, we'll smooth it out a little bit. And as I shared the story of where pews come from, it took some of the nostalgia, because what you're fighting, what you're working against is nostalgia. Mm-hmm. The wedding that happened there, the good memory that happened there. So one of the things was I moved toward the nostalgia. And it's like, wouldn't it be great to create nostalgia for those coming to be served at the food bank? That this space is a space where I was fed, where I was loved, where I was greeted with compassion because they made space for me. That story stands in equal weight, if not greater weight, than I had my wedding here. Plus, it makes the person who is holding on to the past, question that value of holding the past against the hospitality and warmth of what this space could be. Now, that being said, again, the principle of do your homework. White tables from Staples are not warm and inviting and exciting. It's like, well, we can set those up anywhere. We do it for the yard sale. But a space that is designed with the intent of when somebody comes for food to our food bank, this is a coffee station and it looks like Starbucks. And this is a seating area to get in out of the cold for a few minutes. And this is where you get the food, which looks less like a yard sale and more like a grocery store with dignity and value to given to those people. When you present that, the person, forgive me for being so blunt, but the person who's hanging on to the nostalgia of their wedding starts to look pretty small. And they lose the weight of their argument because you're coming at it with compassion and care, and they're coming at it with, but I like it like this, which isn't a Christian value.
I love that. And I love that you're blunt. I don't think you are. You're just,
my dad is
straightforward.
my father was German. And so, you know what's fun? Work is fun. Organizing is fun. Straight lines. Those are all fun. Those are all very fun.
Authentic. Choose the word authentic instead.
Okay. Your word's better.
I think this is just a fabulous idea because I've visited the food bank while it's been happening on a Thursday. And the people who are there are wonderful, wonderful members of our congregation. And they treat those people so warmly. And you're right, it's not a hospitable space. And they are talking about putting in a coffee station and a place to visit. And that would make it so nice. So even if you could get someone to come and speak about their experience of receiving food there, it would be nice. I don't know if anyone would. Our church is in an area where there's a lot of high-rise apartment buildings, and a lot of immigrants tend to live there. Families in apartment buildings. So we do things for the kids on Halloween and Easter and stuff, because living in an apartment is quite limiting.
It's very isolating. Yeah, it's very isolating. And so, you have a space there that could be the gathering space, the warm, welcoming, meet your neighbor space. And people will give to that. It's like, of course we care about these people. Of course we care about immigrants. It's in our Christian DNA to do so. You'll have more money than you know what to do with.
And it's in our values, what we do anyway. So yeah, it is going to make those people look small.
Yeah, and it's and you might find that they become some of the greatest advocates of that space afterward. Once people sat in the chairs in our sanctuary, I never heard about it again.
I'll bet you didn't.
No, it's like 2 weeks in and it's like, oh, this is nice. So it was worth. And then when we cleared out the chairs for Vacation Bible School, and then when we were able to have a banquet, and it's like, oh, you don't eat in the sanctuary, but it was the most beautiful banquet the church had ever had, right? Stained glass windows, and the flexibility and adaptability of that space became a huge strength. And then during COVID, with social distancing, guess what? We could move the rows apart. We could create social distancing and still be in the sanctuary rather than roping off stuff or taping stuff off or this kind of thing. So it still looked like a nice space, but we were able to do the distancing. So the adaptability it presents in various scenarios.
I don't want to cut conversation off. I know we said we'd go till 3. I'll just give a chance. Dave or Gordon, do you have any questions you want to ask?
If you don't mind, I'll just give a brief status. I'm with St. Columba by the Lake Church in Pointe Claire, Quebec. I'm a member of the RNS Committee, Resource and Stewardship, and I'm also a member of the Accessibility Committee. My story is very similar to yours. I see you're smiling, Doug.
Yeah, I'm just saying
We've
God
been-
bless you in my mind.
We've been going through for more years than I know about, at least 15, about doing accessibility. But more recently, I've been involved about 4 years ago in getting the project started again and geared up. We've done a lot of work. We did a lot of the things what you're mentioning. We actually got from the Enabling Accessibility Fund, the federal government, we got $100,000 sitting in our bank from them. We did a budget. We had the architects come and do all their work. We ran into a lot of problems with code stuff, fire codes and all of that. Caught us a lot by surprise, and we got caught by COVID.
Mhm.
And so finally last spring, we got our budget all set up. We went to the city. The city was ready to give us the permit. We did some construction bids. Only one construction company came back. Their bid was 3 times higher than what we had estimated. It went up to $800,000. We were thinking around $250,000. So we had to, I guess you could say, put it on a temporary hold. Strangely enough, the latest news with the federal government is they don't really want to give us that money back. So they're trying to convince us to do some smaller projects. So we've come back to the drawing board, and we're trying to do, unfortunately, instead of an elevator, because we had that rat's warren kind of building like you were describing. We wanted an elevator, but to squeeze one in, it just would have caused too much havoc, too much expense. So now we're thinking about chair lifts and on 2 sets of stairs and a big ramp from the parking lot right up to the main sanctuary entry door. So we're going to go back along that lines and see if we can get it done. We had not done a real capital campaign yet. We had told the congregation all along where we were going and how much it was going to cost at the time. So we've done all that work already, and the congregation was very much on board with it. So good. But we had to put a pause.
What's your annual budget, Dave?
We're at about $220,000.
You could probably get this done with a 4-year campaign.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I hear you.
at the 800,000. At the 800,000.
You think,
get this done.
Yeah. We hadn't got to that stage where we went back to with the congregation on that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's financially, yes.
Okay, if you think of more questions and you want to send them to me or Doug before next week's presentation, feel free to do that, because then he'll be able to think about things and prep it, and that we'll try and promote this a little more and encourage people that they can always catch the recording. So we may have a few more, but if it's another small group, I think this has been great to be able to have one-on-one conversation and bring your specific questions as well, and encourage people to watch the recordings if you'd like to share it. Jim, do you want to share screen? Yeah, just a reminder where this recordings will be shared. It's just Google leadership webinars or capital campaign webinar, but we will be sending an email out to all ministers and congregations the same way we did when we promoted this, just to let them know once it's been posted. So once again, if you think of any issues that you want for a webinar in the future, send me an email and let me know, or let us know. We're just working on the draft for next year for both treasurers and stewardship webinars. And so we're developing that and hope to send it out in December. So if you have any ideas, now is a great time to get one in, and we'll be sure to do it. So other than that, thank you very much. And thank you, Doug. We look forward to seeing you next week.